Fleming, oh, and I'm a volunteer with the Sioux Climate Hub. I'll be your moderator for tonight's webinar, the first of our spring webinar series. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Robinson Huron Treaty Territory and that the land in which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, and particularly the Garden River and Batchewana First Nations, as well as the Métis people. A little bit about the Sioux Climate Hub. The Climate Hub is a nonpartisan group of concerned citizens advancing climate change mitigation and adaptation to align Sault Ste. Marie with scientific, aspirational, and global targets for greenhouse gas emission reductions. We aim to do this through education, engagement, and action. We are part of Climate Realities Project Canada's Community Climate Hub Network, which is a grassroots network of hubs working together for local climate action across the country. If you're interested in following our activities, signing up for our quarterly newsletter, or joining the hub as a volunteer, check out our website, find us on Facebook and Instagram, or email us. You can find all of our previous webinars on our YouTube channel and keep an eye on our social media outlets for our upcoming webinars. Tonight, we're happy to welcome our presenter, Adam Gouge, a terrestrial programs development intern with the Invasive Species Centre here in Sault Ste. Marie. Adam develops invasive species literature, including training courses and fact sheets for notable alien invasive species, and gives educational presentations. Adam has a master's degree of science in biology from Algoma University, where he studied the habitat of the eastern sand darter to support the reintroduction of this fish into Big Otter Creek. He enjoys many sports and outdoor activities, and he's passionate about biology, ecology, and conservation. I'm sure that enthusiasm will be contagious as he talks with us tonight. So welcome, Adam.
Thanks so much, Robert. If you'd like, I can go ahead and share my presentation now.
Yep.
Okay, we see my NRC CAN services. Introduction slide, is it?
That's still Rob's, I believe.
Oh, that's still Rob's. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. Okay, there we are.
Good.
Hi. So, as Rob mentioned, I'm Adam Gouge. I work at the Invasive Species Centre, and I'm going to be giving a talk on invasive species and climate change and some of the overlaps between the two and some of the effects and how they interact with each other.
And so just one more note. If you have questions, please raise your hand. We may be able to acknowledge that and have you ask your question immediately or shortly. And we'll also address questions or comments in the chat after the webinar. Thank you.
So I just wanted to give a quick land acknowledgement before I got started. So the Invasive Species Centre honors the long history of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation people on the lands now known as Canada, and strives to show respect to their ancestors, their communities, and to them individually. We greatly appreciate the significance of the lands, waters, and all living things, and offer our gratitude to the Indigenous people for their care and teachings about our earth. Our relationships with Indigenous communities are important, and we will continue to listen and learn how we can be in a good relationship with Indigenous peoples, the lands and the waters, and all living things, and act accordingly. The Invasive Species Centre respectfully acknowledges that our head office is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Batchewana, and Garden River First Nations, as well as the longtime settlement of the Métis people in the Robinson Huron Treaty area. So a little bit about the Invasive Species Centre for anyone doesn't know. We're located in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. The goal is to prevent the introduction and spread of high-risk invasive species in Canada by connecting stakeholders with knowledge and technology. We're a not-for-profit hub for collaboration and knowledge sharing. We're a respected partner and leader in invasive species science, education, and action. The vision of the Invasive Species Centre is a Canada where land and water are protected from invasive species. The mission is mobilizing action against invasive species that harm the environment, economy, and society. And our values include inclusion, innovation, stewardship, collaboration, and commitment to excellence. So what are invasive species? They're non-native organisms that have been introduced to an area. These may be plants, animals, pathogens. They're typically spread through anthropogenic mediated pathways, so they're spread via human activities. They can cause harm to the environment, the economy, or society. Once they're established, they typically spread rapidly as they have less predation and competitors as they typically do in their natural range. Not all non-native species are invasives, so some species will become naturalized and integrate into a well-functioning ecosystem. Now, how do invasive species spread? One of the primary ways that they spread is through global shipping. So ballast water or vessels and containers on ships that ship cargo. So when a ship goes to a port and they are empty, they don't have the cargo, they will pick up ballast water. Once they pick up their load, they will release ballast water. So that will carry with them any of the organisms or organic material that they've picked up where they filled their ballast water. Agriculture and construction can also spread through soil, the movement of soil, and also domestic plants or pets. This can be either intentional or accidental. So some individuals may have a pet that they no longer want, like a goldfish, and release it into the wild, or plants may unintentionally spread through seed or other means. And then there's recreational spread as well. So bait fish, sometimes individuals will not know that a bait fish may be invasive to an area and they will be using it for fishing and then dump their bait when they're done fishing, and that fish may become invasive. Also contaminated vehicles, so plant propagules such as seeds or other plant matter may be stuck in the tires of a recreational vehicle. It may then go to another location and carry with it that material, and it may be spread to that area. Globally, rates of invasions are increasing drastically. This is due in part to global expansion of shipping, travel, and the pet trade. Climate change has magnified this increase, and also ecological disturbances are conducive to the spread of invasive species. Now, the invasion process typically occurs when an invasive species is present in a pathway. So the pathway would be, as I mentioned, the shipping or the recreational vehicle. Then the organism is either released or escapes. That pathway establishes a population, which then further disperses and propagates into other environments, and then leads to economic, environmental, and societal harm. And what this means for management is, or the management steps to try to prevent this are prevention is the number one step. After that, it's early detection, rapid response, and eradication. Once they have an invasive species has been established, it's now the goal of management to control or slow the spread. And then if the invasive species becomes established to a point where you're no longer able to control or slow the spread, humans response, so changing of activities due to altered landscapes or restoration attempts. So that may be through replanting of trees or other native species. Now, as I mentioned, prevention is the number one step in trying to control invasive species. At each step, it becomes exponentially more or less cost effective. So you're spending more money to achieve less with each step of the invasion process. So the primary goal of management is to try to ensure that populations are not established, and if they are, containing them so that they don't spread to a point at which the cost becomes exponentially greater. So some of the economic harms of invasive species are reduced yield in industries such as agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. Invasive species such as plants or aquatic invertebrates can cause physical damage to equipment and infrastructure. There's also the costs that I mentioned, such as the control costs. They can decrease property value if they become too prevalent in an area. So in the North American economy, it's estimated that we lose $26 billion a year, or that $26 billion in US dollars per year was lost in the 2010s for the North American economy. And in California, the direct cost of invasive plants alone is approximately $82 million per year. So this is just a little excerpt from a study that reviewed the amount that individual nations spend on trying or lose based on invasive species and the percentage of their GDP. So if you look at Canada, it's nearly 1% of our GDP that's spent in trying to or through the damage costs of invasive species. So the ecological and environmental effects of invasive species. So they're listed, invasive species are listed as one of the greatest threats to biodiversity. As I mentioned, these once established, they rapidly expand their range and abundance. This displaces native species. So it's that can either take place through competition or predation. So competition of resources or direct predation. Many invasive plants are allelopathic. So they make the conditions such that it's difficult for other plants to grow in those conditions. This can have cascading impacts on biodiversity, community composition, and which can lead to alteration of the food web overall. And then this leads to decreased ecosystem resilience. So if we look at this little table here, this is the impact of specific invasive species in different regions of the world and how they've led to either extirpations or extinctions. So if you look at the rosy wolf snail, it's a mollusk, and within the Pacific Islands, it's led to the extinction of at least 134 snail species. Zebra mussels which are a problem in North America and Canada, have led to the extirpation of several dozen freshwater bivalves. Nile perch in Lake Victoria have led to the extinction of 200 endemic cichlid species. The brown tree snake in Guam has led to the extinction of many of Guam's native birds, lizards, and bats, and several global extinctions. So domestic cat has led to the extinction of at least 14 vertebrate species globally, and the amphibian chytrid fungus has led to presumably 90 amphibian species becoming extinct globally. The social consequences of invasive species are, because there is a need for control efforts, this can reduce the budget available for other needs such as recreation. It can impact recreation because landscapes can be altered and become less enjoyable. Hunting and angling, because there's less native fauna to hunt, and it can actually create hazards. So there's some invasive plants that create phototoxic sap, which can cause burns when you're exposed to the sun, so they can become a hazard and an overall general nuisance. So on top of that, there are associated health risks with some invasive species, such as diseases. So some invasive species carry pathogens. And there's a correlation between invasive species and a changing climate. So this is anthropogenically mediated. So both of these things, both of these topics are in part caused by global shipping, emissions, environmental destruction of forest wetlands, and also resource depletion. And also both of these issues cause declines in biodiversity. These contribute to one another. So there's a feedback loop between invasive species and climate change. They also magnify the effects of each other. They work and disrupt important cycles. So that may be carbon cycles or temperature cycles of both water and terrestrial systems. These can lead to great consequences for native biodiversity. So greater abundances of invasive species. And with warmer climate, this can lead to longer growing seasons for the invasive species, and actually produce conditions which are conducive to having greater reproductive capacity. So both invasive species and climate change will occur naturally. However, we can look at several factors that indicate that these are anthropogenic caused, and they are the rate of change. So although an invasion may happen within an ecosystem naturally, the rate at which invasions are currently happening are greater than before. It also happens on a global scale. So we're looking at specific species being spread across the globe, not just to one additional adjacent ecosystem. And these are quantifiable effects. So we can look at the historical records. We can also predict using trends. So based on the rate at which things are changing, we can model that and look and predict what the situation is going to look like in the future. And there's correlations indicated by historical data, as I mentioned. So, long-term weather pattern data, and also the magnitude at which these things are happening. So it's some invasions, let's say, are happening and there's greater population growth than would happen naturally. Same thing with the climate change. So it's the rate at which it's happening and also the magnitude at which these issues are occurring. So climate change can influence the pathways of spread of invasive species. So travel and migration, individuals may be traveling to cooler locations when it's hot where they are. This can lead to the spread of invasive species because individuals can carry with them invasive species. There's also altered transport routes. So due to decreasing amounts of sea ice, this opens different areas of the oceans that may not have been able to be used for shipping in the past. There's also extreme weather events at a greater rate, so this can increase dispersals, and conditions are also being modified. So suitable habitat in locations where these invasive species may not have been able to occur previously may be caused by climate change. So what this means for trying to manage invasive species is you have climate managers have to be climate smart. So they have to take into consideration the effect that climate change may have on their future plans for controlling invasive species, prioritizing high risk pathways. It's also important to use technology, such as applying modeling and other emerging technologies, account for human aspects. So with the increased travel and the new shipping routes, you have to account for that in your modeling and coordinate efforts between groups. So that may be either domestically or internationally in order to try to curb the spread of invasive species. So, as I said, climate change can cause increased invasions through several ways. So, forest fires, droughts, or flooding may allow the spread of invasive species, as well as decreasing abundance of native species. So that means that if a native species would have been a predator of that invader, that would have potentially kept that invasive population in control. There also may be less competition for valuable resources with a lacking or a less abundance of native species. There's also reduction in natural barriers. So greater or lower temperatures in a specific area make it more conducive to an invading species, or lower water levels in certain areas. Water may have acted as a barrier in a certain location, but now that area sees lower water levels, so therefore that cannot act as a barrier anymore. Thermal tolerance is a big topic to look at with invasive species, specifically insects. It's a big one for, so we can look at an example such as spotted lanternfly. So warmer winters enable the survival of species that were unable to persist in these locations previously. So spotted lanternfly eggs may remain viable at temperatures as low as 20 below 0 Celsius. So warming climate may potentially allow these forest pests to overwinter and become established in southern Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia if the temperature does not drop below that period, or below that mark for a extended period of time. Another example is hemlock woolly adelgid, which is now experiencing 60% winter mortality when typically we would have seen approximately 90% mortality of these insects over winter. Another cause or another effect of climate change on invasive species are sleeper species. So these are non-native invasive species that are present in low population levels. So they may be present for an extended period of time, but just not have reached a threshold to which they've become problematic. so they've been suppressed by unfavorable conditions. And then with warming climate or other changes to the environment, there can be increasing abundance and range of this species when the conditions become more favorable. So one example is the Cyrus wood wasp. It's found in southern Ontario and Quebec, it was first detected in 2005. It's a threat to pine plantations, the production of timber and pulpwood, and it threatens endangered Kirtland warblers jack pine habitat. And this is just a graph indicating what I spoke about earlier, where the species is present, but as the conditions become more favorable and the populations grow, it may reach a threshold and become greater and become a greater and greater cost to control it, and also require more effort. Another example that we can look at as far as species that are problematic in changing climatic with changing climate are invasive grasses in Hawaii. So wildfires become greater issue in a greater amount of locations due to changing climate. And the invasive grasses within Hawaii only accentuate this. So devastating wildfires in Hawaii are partially attributed to these invasive grasses, which are more drought resistant and highly ignitable. Also, once they've died, they remain standing. So therefore, native species of grass or other species can not repopulate the area. They were initially introduced for cattle grazing, but then colonized vacant sugar plantations when that industry shrunk within Hawaii. And recently there's been a 300% increase in the area that's burned annually in wildfires within Hawaii. So invasive grasses are also a problem in the American West. So most major fires of the Mojave and Great Basin are fueled by invasive grasses. 6 invasive grass species caused fire frequency to increase by up to 150% in United States ecosystems. Another now an effect of invasive species is carbon sequestration. So forest plots affected by insects disturbance sequestered 69% less carbon on average than they would have naturally. Forest plots affected by disease disturbance sequestered 28% less carbon on average. So collectively reduce the annual carbon sequestration and capacity of forests by an estimated 12.8 kilograms of carbon. So approximately 9% of the contiguous U.S. total's annual forest carbon sequestration. So due to insect and disease from invasive species, there's the forest's ability to sequester carbon was significantly reduced. So also losses from insects and diseases are likely higher than estimated, since small disturbances, so those affecting less than 25% of the trees in a plot or less than 1 acre, were not included in the analysis. And there needs to be the introductions of new pests and pathogens needs to be improved, and for forest management to make forests more resilient to disturbances, so that this trend no longer continues. So I'll go through some of the invasive species, some other invasive species that we have that are an issue in Ontario. So I'll go by category. So the invasive plants and the issues they cause. So many are introduced ornamentally. So people bring them over for ground cover or to plant in their garden as ornamental. and then they are either escape via uncontrolled management or by seed dispersal. They typically do spread rapidly and have limited ecological value. So a lot of the fauna, so insects or other invertebrates, are not able, or larger animals are unable to eat these species as they haven't adapted with them. Many of the invasive plants are allelopathic, so they'll prevent the growth of native plants and this ends up producing monoculture stands. So you'll see large sections of land with a single species. They can also cause structural damage and produce toxins. And if we go to the aquatic invasive plants, their pathways are typically through recreational vehicles. So a boat moving from one place to another. They displace native vegetation, reduce the rate of water flow. They can alter oxygen levels and can affect recreational activities. So that would be boating, fishing, or swimming. A couple of examples are European water chestnut. These form dense floating mats which shade out native vegetation and impede recreational activities. So it's a little hard to go swimming in an area that has been overrun with European water chestnut. And because there's so much plant matter, when it decomposes all at one time, it can decrease oxygen with levels within the water. Water soldier is another invasive aquatic plant. It also forms dense floating mats and alters water chemistry and can disrupt recreational activity. With water soldier, it also has sharp serrated leaf edges, which can cut the skin of an individual coming in contact with it. Invasive species or invasive fishes are typically spread through ballast water, as I spoke of before, aquaculture or the pet trade. So sometimes with aquaculture, there will be a species of fish that's kept domestically, which will then, through flooding or will escape and then become invasive. And this can lead to decreases in populations of native fishes through either increased competition or through predation, eventually altering the entire aquatic ecosystem. So one example we have is brown goby. It's a small benthic fish. It's native to Eastern Europe and invasive in the Great Lakes, and has led to population declines of native fishes through both predation and competition. So depending on the life stage of the native benthic fish, round goby might be a predator or a competitor. So when they're in their larval stage, oftentimes round goby will be a predator. They're known as being relatively more aggressive over resources than native species, and they can also be a competitor once those same native fishes have grown to their full size, or their adult size, sorry. And this is a situation where one species can displace many. So you're not going to have just round goby come in and it's taking the place of one native species. Typically, it will displace many, and then you end up with more abundance of round goby than native species. Invasive carps are another species. There's several species of them. They typically have similar attributes. So they're native to parts of Asia. They're used in fish culture ponds for management of vegetation, although they will escape accidentally through either flooding or other means, and they compete with native fishes for food and habitat. Aquatic invasive invertebrates spread through ballast water or through personal watercraft, so they can affix to the side of boats or ships, and they can be spread that way. They compete with native invertebrate species. They can also reduce resources for native fishes. So a lot of, like for instance, zebra mussels or other invertebrates are filter feeders, so they can reduce the amount of food for small fish. And they can affect recreational activities such as boating, fishing, and swimming. So, because they are reducing the amount of native fish in the area, that may affect the fishing and swimming. A lot of these may be sharp and therefore affect recreational activities. Pathogens may also be invasive. So these typically are less significant in their native ranges because the plant life may have built up some type of natural defenses to these pathogens. So the pathways are typically spread through invertebrates or contact with other plants. They infect native species and can end up reducing population sizes, even leading to extirpations, and can be less detectable initially. So a lot of these symptoms of, let's say, plant pathogens will look similar to each other. Therefore, someone who's not educated on the topic may be unable to identify this when it's early on in the infestation. Examples of this are oak wilt. So this is a fungal disease infecting different species of oak. It's spread through beetles or root grafts, so underground, and it affects the sapwood of the trees and prevents flow of nutrients through vascular tissues, and can cause death in under 1 year, which is relatively rapid for a pathogen of a tree. There's also beech leaf disease, which is caused by an invasive nematode. The leaves become discolored, deformed, and shriveled, and this also leads to a reduction in bud and leaf production. Terrestrial animals, the pathways of spread for them are typically release, escape, or the pet trade. So some species have been intentionally released, such as the house sparrow, or they can escape, or they can also be introduced via pet trade. So as I mentioned earlier, goldfish may be released and then become invasive in an aquatic ecosystem. They have a greater dispersal potential than some other categories that I spoke about earlier. So because they're not confined to water or a specific substrate like plants might be, or host organisms, they can move around on their own. Typically, animals do have ways of being more mobile than the other categories that I spoke about, and therefore have greater potential harm in some instances. A couple of examples are the house sparrow, which are native to Eurasia, Northern Africa, and most of Europe. They were intentionally introduced. They build nests in holes or crevices of buildings basically everywhere they can and displace native species. They also have a longer breeding season than many of the other species, which may have overlapping ecological niches. So they're able to produce more offspring and therefore outcompete these native species. A red-eared slider is another example of a terrestrial animal that is invasive. It's native to Mississippi River waterways. Because it's a common pet, it's often spread through that mechanism. It displaces native species. It has high fecundity, so it can produce more offspring. It's also very adaptable, so it can live in a wide variety of conditions, and it can spread diseases such as salmonella or ranavirus. Another topic or another category is forest pests. So these are insects. they're important to the forestry industry because of the potential damage that they can cause. So one example is the emerald ash borer. Its native range is China, Korea, Japan, Mongolia, Taiwan, and Eastern Russia. So it affects the vascular tissue of trees, so it prevents the flow of nutrients. It was first detected in North America in the Detroit, Windsor area in 2002 and feeds on ash trees. So black ash is a species of concern. It is currently endangered, and emerald ash borer has led to the decline in those populations. Um, Another important species for forestry is the hemlock woolly adelgid. So it's an aphid-like insect. So it feeds on hemlock needles. It can impact the forest industry. So eastern hemlock is significantly affected by infestations of hemlock woolly adelgid. It's spread through bird and other wildlife or overlapping tree crowns. So this pest doesn't really have the same dispersal mechanisms as some other insects may. It's not going to fly from one tree to the next. It has a crawler stage, but it won't have the same potential of spread without the assistance of birds and other wildlife or the hemlock trees overlapping. There are different variants of the hemlock woolly adelgid, which are less detrimental, and also the different species of hemlock are less affected in different locations than the eastern hemlock is. Within our region, there are some species that are invasive. So I've put a couple of examples here. So sea lamprey is an important one. It's native to the Atlantic Ocean, but invasive in the Great Lakes. It can devastate fisheries. So these have multiple life stages. So the majority of the life stage of a sea lamprey is actually spent in its larval form. So that will be the stage where the treatment is effective. And then after 3 to 10 years, it'll become a parasitic juvenile, which will allow it to latch onto a fish and which can eventually lead to death of the fish. And then it becomes a spawning adult. So it will go up riverways or creeks and spawn as an adult. An invasive plant that's common in Sault Ste. Marie is Vinca minor or lesser periwinkle. So these have been present in North America for centuries. So they were used medicinally and for ground cover. They form dense understory mats. So you'll often see monoculture stands of these where you'll just see the waxy green leaves cover the entire forest floor where they've invaded. They can reproduce through like vegetatively, so they don't need seed dispersal. They can other parts of the plant allow them to spread. So through creeping vines along the floor, forest floor, and they're also extremely difficult to eradicate. So because they're able to propagate through other means than just seeds, if there's different parts of the plant still present underground, even though the surface may be free of these plants, it often takes several years to fully eradicate Vinca minor. So what we can do about this is we can educate. So educate people to identify alien invasive species, can also monitor. So this is crucial for rapid response to be able to identify when there is an invasive species present, especially in an area where it has not been identified before. We can introduce regulations, legislations, and policy. So this will regulate the activities that people may participate in that may be conducive to the spread of invasive species. After they've been established, we can also apply treatment. So this can be mechanical or manual, chemical or biocontrol. So mechanical control involves mechanical removal. So with plants, you're chopping, you're digging, you're cutting, and then you can also apply controlled burns in certain circumstances. With other species, you can apply traps, or with aquatic species, you can apply dams or blockades to prevent, for instance, the lamprey from going up a water body to spawn. With chemical controls, you can use pesticides, so herbicides, insecticides, or lampricides. So those lampricides can be applied to the water bodies which contain the larval form of the lamprey, which produces them or prevents them from reaching their adult form, and then therefore spawning and completing their life cycle. You can also use deterrents or attractants such as hormones, pheromones, or alarm cues to alter the behavior of whatever pest it is, to try to prevent them from reaching either their host organism or environments that are more conducive to them reproducing. Another step that can be taken is biocontrol. So this is the release of either a natural predator, a parasite, or a pathogen. These are intentionally released and do not typically pose threats to the ecosystems in which they're released. However, there have been instances where species have been released for biocontrol and have eventually ultimately become invasive themselves. Typically, there's a significant amount of research that goes into considering when biocontrol is considered. So that's looking at the other potential host. Let's say it's a plant in which these introduced biocontrol agents may infest. So they're not just biocontrol is used sparingly, and a lot of thought goes into planning to make sure that additional harm is not caused to the ecosystem. So climate change can drastically affect the efficacy of biocontrol. So it kind of complicates the relationship between the host and the predator or parasite that's being released for biocontrol. So it can reduce the feeding efficacy of a biocontrol agent. It can increase the biomass of a target host. Therefore, the biocontrol agent may be less effective. May also reduce the range overlap. So in previous instances where the ranges of the biocontrol agent and the invasive species overlap quite well, due to changing climate, they may no longer overlap as well. Therefore, you'll have a reduced efficiency at which the biocontrol species can affect the invasive species. You can also see an increased phenological mismatch. So if one species is going through reproduction quicker due to, or earlier in the year due to warmer temperatures, this can, and the other isn't, this can lead to a mismatch in when they're the most effective time for the biological agent will occur. So this is a little graphic describing a little bit of what I talked about. So the morphological and reproductive mismatches, phenological and physiological, as well as movement and behavior or developmental. Another step that can be taken is, as I mentioned, legislation. So in Ontario, we have the Invasive Species Act, which was enacted in Ontario on November 3rd, 2016. It was introduced to mitigate the risk of invasive species through prevention, detection, response, and eradication. So many actions involving prohibited or restricted species are illegal under this act. So depending on whether a species is prohibited or restricted, different actions will be prohibited under the Invasive Species Act. And another example of an invasive species that I wanted to talk about is Asian longhorn beetle in Ontario. So the Asian longhorn beetle feeds on many tree species, so it's not genus specific, although primarily the concern in Ontario would be maple trees. It has the potential to cause irreparable damage to tree populations. It's listed as among the world's top 100 worst invasive alien species. Close by, there's been outbreaks in Chicago and New Jersey. In 2003, a breeding population was discovered in the city of Toronto and Vaughan area. This prompted an emergency response from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So they collaborated with experts from the field, from different fields, and went through an evaluation phase where they looked at the route. They tried to establish the route of entry. This would allow them to determine the best course of action. They went through a phase of research and consultation. So this involved looking at which trees and deciding, which trees were at risk, which areas may be most effective, and what plans of action should be taken next. So surveys were completed within the areas of the infestation to determine which trees required treatment. Treatment involved the removal and destruction of trees that had been affected, as well as the application of herbicide sprays on stumps to prevent regrowth. And then following the treatment, there was follow-up monitoring within the area to ensure that there wasn't any missed infestation. The area of Toronto Vaughan were considered pest-free in 2013. However, later in that year, a new satellite population was discovered. However, prompt action following several of the same steps that were previously enacted allowed eradication, and the area has thus been considered pest-free since 2020. The reason why I wanted to bring up this example specifically is because it's a great example in a topic that is often very bleak sometimes, and it feels kind of doom and gloom. This is a great example of how when individuals work together and systematically and really care about something, that there can be a solution to the issue, as long as it's early enough in the infestation that the invasive species hasn't spread to a point where it's no longer controllable, that it can be eradicated. This is a very good example of a lot of hard work and a lot of people that cared a lot in order to prevent this pest from becoming an issue within Canada. And yeah, that's why I specifically chose to share this example. So what you can do on a individual level to prevent the spread of invasive species is, when you go out in an area, whether you're hiking or camping, you can clean your boots and gear. This can prevent the spread of seeds or other plant material or even insects or other organisms on your gear. You can buy local firewood. So if wood has been infected by an insect and you carry it to another location, it can spread that way. When you're gardening or planting other species around your house, you can choose native species to plant instead of the um, non-native alternatives, and don't dump your bait when you're done fishing. So typically you would only use bait fish that are permitted within your area. So Ontario has different fishery zones, and depending on the zone that you're in, certain bait will be permitted. Some areas don't allow live bait. Some do. Some allow only certain species. So adhering to those guidelines and not dumping your bait fish. And then clean, drain, and dry your boat. So when you get out of a waterway, clean your boat, drain any reservoirs of water, and then dry the boat so that any invasive species will not be able to be spread via your boat being transported to a new area. You can also become educated, so learn how to identify invasive species, as well as actions to prevent the spread. So the previous actions I mentioned are just some off the top, but there's other things that you can do to prevent the spread of invasive species. You can also report any sightings. So if you learn how to identify or know already how to identify invasive species, if you locate it, you can report sightings or any illegal activities. So if you know that bait fish are not permitted within an area, you can report this, or anyone with possession of a prohibited species. You can also contribute, so you can take actions through funds such as the Ontario Invasive Species Action or the Invasive Species Centre Community Science Program, as well as the Ontario Invasive Species Action Plans. So you can take part in those. And you can visit our website to sign up for quarterly newsletters, bi-weekly media research, and event scans. We hold event and webinars as well. We have a resource library, which has materials on invasive species for all level of expertise. This includes fact sheets, technical bulletins, clean equipment protocols, native plant species for gardening, and many more. So as I mentioned, the planting native species, there's alternatives to specific non-native plants. We also have invasive species training program. So these are virtual and self-paced courses for anyone wanting to learn more about the impacts of invasive species in their community or workplace. You can also sign up to receive updates on future courses or email us at training@invasivespeciescentre.ca. We also have a webinar series. So monthly, we'll have a guest speaker, which presents a webinar on a variety of invasive species topics. And you can check out our YouTube channel. And that's it. Thank you. I can take questions now if anybody has them.
Adam, I've got one here for you if I could.
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks for a great presentation. Really comprehensive. Appreciate it. I was really interested in the slide you had about not all non-native are invasive species, sort of at the start there. And then as you went through, I thought, wow, I didn't really think that was invasive. And I was focused on the house sparrow as an example. And so I was, since that's been around, like you said, for a long time. So I was wondering how and who decides whether a non native species becomes invasive or non invasive.
Um, this is a great question. So sometimes it's black and white, where it's causing noticeable harm to the either the one of the either the economy, the environment, or it can have social impacts as well. But other times it's more difficult to determine. So I would say that it depends. Some people may consider a species invasive and others may not. Norway maple is a good example of one that kind of falls on, depending on what camp you're in, it may be invasive or it may not, um, because it's been in certain areas for so long that people would consider it naturalized. However, it also displaces some species of trees that may be native to those areas. So they're really, as biologists, we like putting things in gray zones, even though we create boxes, but then things end up in gray zones, and they're not always black and white. So I guess it would depend on the species and who you're talking to, and by what metric you're considering it invasive. If that kind of answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, that's good. So does the same thing, the gray area sort of apply to the house sparrow too, or?
I think you would consider. I mean, I would say that based on the detrimental impacts on native species, I would say that it's probably considered invasive, although there's likely some ecosystems where it's less detrimental than others. Um, and it would all depend on I guess, how well native populations are doing and what other damage it may be doing. I know that they can become a nuisance, just even excluding the ecological detriment that they do by outcompeting native species. Because they can nest in so many little crevices, people find them a nuisance in certain areas. So therefore, even excluding the ecological damage, I would say that they're invasive, and just because of that aspect.
Great, thanks a lot.
Okay. Other questions? Adam, could you describe the community science program a little bit?
Yeah, so there's different programs that we have that involve individuals partaking in programs that then allow us to um, work towards a solution. So one of the examples I can think of is our hemlock wooded adelgid. So this is involves individuals that have hemlock on their property and can monitor for HWA, which is the hemlock woolly adelgid acronym, and then they can send their samples in, which can then be analyzed for either the crawlers, so the actual HWA themselves, or through eDNA. So eDNA is pretty cool in the sense that it can be collected from a number of different settings, depending, like you can use water for aquatic organisms, or in this case, you're testing for the presence of HWA DNA. So Lauren has presented the link in the chat to the community science programs. So if anyone wants to take a look, they can look there.
Okay. Can you give a brief summary of local ones?
Specifically local. I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Is there a black ash one?
Oh, so the Black Ash Network, yes. So that's a community science program.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mark, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. What would you consider the worst plant invasive locally, like right in the Sioux area? Putting aside the Norway maples that are on everybody's front lawn, maybe the next one.
Probably go with Phragmites. So invasive Phragmites. There's a program designated just for that. It grows rather rapidly and spreads pretty easily through certain corridors. So you'll see it a lot of the time along roadways. And it can grow to it typically grows in monoculture stands, so there's not a lot of other plants growing among these the invasive Phragmites. So I would go with that one probably. I mean, I'm probably also partial to periwinkle because of if you look at the Ogoma U woodlot, it's pretty covered on the ground. And I know specifically although it may not be as apparent as Phragmites, it can have a dramatic impact on soil invertebrates and the ecology of organisms that such as ground dwelling spiders. And then that can lead to greater detrimental impacts on the ecosystem. So either of those two for me are probably the two I would say are the worst, but in my opinion. But I mean, it's probably it depends on who you ask once again and what their values are and what their I guess, yeah, that's essentially what I would say.
Thanks very much. Some of the folks online tonight attacked a stand of periwinkle up at Stokely, and I'm not sure whether they eradicated it, but they must have caused it some damage. Good on them.
That's good. People think they're like, I mean, they're like when they flower, they're like nice to look at because of the nice color and stuff, but they do create a lot of ecological damage, and they just become very it's the only thing you see in the understory when they're present, usually when they've had time to kind of propagate and spread throughout the forest floor.
Hey. Adam, I was also wondering about, in terms of dealing with invasives, is there any opportunities or people ever try introduce or encouraging competitors for whatever ecological niche they're trying to invade?
So, I mean, planting native, like if you're in a location where you're planting, like I guess planting native species would be, which I mentioned, would be a good example where just because an organism is invasive and is likely is often able to outcompete native species, you can increase the I guess competition from native plant life by planting native species. Now that would be an instance of biocontrol, but like that's a very becomes extremely complicated when you're trying to introduce, let's say, like a predator or a competitor if it's not native to that area. Like I said, like a lot of research goes into determining whether or not a biocontrol agent would be a threat to the ecosystem. So sometimes it's not as simple as just introducing a competitor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions for Adam? Okay, well, Adam, I'd like to thank you very much for a great presentation, very thorough, and lots to think about there. Um, Our next webinar will be held on Wednesday, April the 29th. That's the last Wednesday in April, same time, 7:30. Our topic will be 30 Years Strong, Algoma Region's Commitment to Forests Canada Envirothon. So this is about Envirothon and will be presented by Guy Smith and Ruth Koskinoga, who are the chairman and coordinator of the Algoma Envirothon. So please plan to join us and keep an eye on our social media for registration information. We'll send an invitation to all subscribers, so if you'd like to receive mail from us, put your address in the chat or let us know at SuClimateHub, that's all one word, at gmail.com. Okay, well, thanks again. And we will say goodbye.